Hello, we are at the final topic today, the fifth topic, which would be about reports, the service, and warranty. And we're rounding up the entire session about afterwards to talk about how you could look at what is the activity that is ongoing within the payment hub, and how you could, after once it has been deployed in its working conditions, what are the post deployment operations that you could look at. So the topics that we are going to be covering, we'll be talking about scope and objectives shortly. We'll then look into a bit of the Kibana dashboard that is there. Then we'll also talk about why we use Kibana and show you some samples of the reports and how the audit trail could be viewed from Kibana. We're also going to talk about the warranty process that there is, how the updates and patches are pushed to Payment Hub, what could be the considerations for backup and disaster recovery, then some of the insights and learnings from the overall implementation process that we've gone through. And finally, we are going to close it with a summary and a course recap of the sessions that we've done so far. As always, we'll talk a little bit about the intended audience. This training is intended for technical project managers and decision makers, for implementation team leads as well. In this case, it is also intended for people from the operations and testing team, and also people who would be responsible for the maintenance of the system and some such. It is also expected that the audience have a basic understanding of the Govstack initiative itself, so that they could understand why the processes that we're talking about have been implemented and why they are there. They should also have some basic understanding and know the implications related to the G2P and P2G use cases, have some basic understanding of Kubernetes and deployment of containerized applications, because this is on what the Payment Hub has been implemented, deployed on. And then have some basic understanding of standard terminologies related to payments industry, overall functioning, and system maintenance and everything. All right. This is the training roadmap. So as we can see, we have been through first 4 sessions. This is the final session of the report of the training roadmap that we've been following. And today we'll be talking about overview. We'll have an overview of a Kibana dashboard, and we'll also talk about why Kibana, why it is being used. Then we'll also going to have a look of some sample parameters reports that are generated using Kibana. Moving on then towards more operational considerations, such as the warranty process, updates and patches, how to maintain and ensure that the system is resilient and is effective. Before we move forward, as always, we would like to clarify the terminologies that may creep up from time to time during our session. So we have Payment Hub and we have Payment Building Block. Payment Building Block refers to the requirements that were chalked out by the Payment Building Block working group, and it refers to the use cases that were required to be implemented. Whereas Payment Hub is the candidate solution that has been implemented on which Payment Building Block requirements have been implemented. And just so on a note, we would also like to point it out over here that all the features that have been developed for Govstack specifically are also part of our main version as well. So all of this is now a complete product and it's there for everyone to use. As we talked previously, so I'm just going to skim through this, that we are going to be talking about having an overview of Kibana, the role it plays in the bigger picture, the reporting format, and then we're going to go towards the operational details and talk about that. At the end of the training, we expect that our audience would have some understanding of why Kibana is being used and how it could be used, how it could be customized and configured to get the reports or results as per expectations. Then there would be some better understanding of the post-deployment and post-implementation processes, such as the warranty processes, such as to understand the change request updates or patches, how to patches are sent for the process. And also we'll be talking a little bit about how to ensure that the system is resilient and check the system's health check. So coming towards our talk about Kibana. So what is Kibana? So Kibana is basically a window into the Elastic Stack. What it means to say is, as in our previous sessions, we've been talking about the general payment hub architecture. And then the payment hub is some of the key components of payment hub include Elasticsearch and the ZB orchestrator. So Elasticsearch is the one, for example, because we've been talking about previously. So we have ZB orchestrator, which is triggering events and all, and also similarly Kafka is queuing operations, and then it is pushing them to all the other components, and those components are being updated in almost real time. That information goes to Elasticsearch, and Elasticsearch ensures that it has the latest information so that it could be consumed by all the other microservices as well. So Elasticsearch is an essential component because it ensures that the system is always updated and the data that is being consumed by various microservices is up to date. So Elasticsearch, therefore Kibana is actually a way through which all that data which is being fed to Elasticsearch can be visualized. So Kibana is the main tool that lets you view all that information that is traveling within Elasticsearch within the payment hub, and lets you see at what period of time what information was being generated or traveling through the system. So specifically, it is a browser-based analytics and search dashboard. The good part about this is that this is browser-based, and not just it lets you visualize the data, it also lets you perform some analytics on it if you want to do it. So it is highly configurable. It depends upon your implementer's requirement, how they want to use it. So, and this, even though there's a certain process to actually use it, for example, if you were trying to put up the system atomically, you would have to download Kibana at your system, then you're going, and you would have had to download, deploy Elasticsearch at your system, and then would have to configure both of them so that it could, so that Kibana could speak to the Elasticsearch pipeline. However, that has already been done in the charts of Payment Hub, as we've been talking about previously. So just to give you an idea, now this is the file that we've been referring to very frequently, because again, and this reiterates a point about packaging the entire product, entire system into a single file and making deployment easier for someone who has prior knowledge of using these tools. So this is the Circle CI file for the environment template that we've been referring to. This is the main package, and as you could see within the pipeline, it also already has Helm charts related to Kibana. So this Kibana visualization, it has further charts related to configurations made for the dashboard, as dashboard already includes the aggregations, the debugging file, all the instructions for that. Besides that, it already has, this is the index pattern. It already has defined from where it would pick up the BPMN or the actions that it has to search for in the system. So these are the files for that. It also has already some of the lens through which it has to search for the transactions, then the search queries through which it would be going into the system and try to pick up the information from. So it has for our implementers, all of these things are already being configured in the default file and are there. And once they are deployed with the system, they are already there. Of course, as per the requirements, the implementers can go as per your own requirement, you could go and update that information customize it as per your own requirement. Right. So, as I was just talking previously, also why Kibana, why the ELK stash as we call it. So overall, they actually together, all of these three components make up a complete process that is there for managing, for visualizing and analyzing data. So if you would recall from our session number 3, where we talked about the deployment models, you would remember that for each of the models that are deployed, we said that the ELK stack is also deployed for all of the models. And why it is there? Because the log stash, it is responsible for whatever logs are being maintained data. It collects and transforms the data so that it is in a specific standard format. Elasticsearch is able to pick up the data from all the sources. It allows searching of big data and then to analyze it, whereas Kibana then pulls data from Elasticsearch and helps the users visualize it and then manage it as required, or generate reports, perform debugging, and some such. So together, these three, they are always part of our standard deployment charts. These are always deployed because they perform their own specific functions. Now, we come to the part where we'll talk about a little bit about the samples that are there for Kibana that we have currently deployed, and how they could be used and how they can tell you a little bit about how to use it. So currently, the scope of our reporting surrounding Kibana is related to specifically these three activities. So the parameters that are covered are, it lets you view all activities of the last X days. For example, again, you will use the audit dashboard filter in Kibana, and we're going to see how that filter can be implemented or where it is used. So you could view the activities of the past X number of days as you want. You could view all the activities of a specific certain action type. Now, as we'll move forward, we'll see, as I just showed you in the circle CI file as well, that when we were talking about over here, the index pattern, that it is going to be picking up some information from the ZB orchestrator. This action type is related to that. So all the BPMN that have been defined in the ZB orchestrator, it picks up, it defines an index for those actions. And because of that, it is able to pick up a specific action and show the reports matching to that. And then it also lets you view activities from certain registering institution. So these are the capabilities that have been configured right now in our current implementation. But of course, they could be updated and used as per the requirements. All right. So before we go on to show you specific screenshots of what we have implemented, we would like to take you to this short video, which explains how to create filters in Kibana. So we just wanted to give you an idea of the filter capability that Kibana gives. Of course, there are lots of more capabilities that the Kibana gives you, but just because right now we are talking about specific instances, this is what we're talking about. All right, moving on, as we just saw that there are various dashboards that are available. In the examples that we are going to follow, we'll be talking on the filters that have been, that we've used on a granular type of dashboard on Kibana. So the granular dashboard in Kibana, rather I'll show you than this over here. So the granular dashboard type that we're talking about, it has more details, or it gives you, let's say, more granular data, so to speak. So for example, it is segmented into various fields that it gives you. If you click on any of the transactions, any of the data that is returned, it gives you more information regarding that specific process or function. For example, in this instance, you could also find out the registering institution ID. If we close this up, this is the maximum. Sorry. Over here, you can find the registering institution ID you have to look through. It gives you different values. For example, it gives you returns back all the processes, the workflows that were completed, the workflows that were not completed. And then further, it shows you the different variables as we talked about. So the granular dashboard, it gives you much more details. Again, just to give a understanding of what we've been talking about, you can see over here the Elastic logo. That is, this is because the Kibana dashboard is pulling up in data from the Elasticsearch. So over here, it is in our Payment Hub implementation as well. They have already been integrated, and it is able to pull this data. So we also have documentation surrounding it. Should there be any issues, that documentation would be able to guide you how to go about integrating it with the Payment Hub properly. All right, over here, you can also see that this is the dashboard functionality. And this is what you're seeing over here is editing granular dashboard. So we talked about granular dashboard first. Why? Because the upcoming samples that we are going to show you are also based on this granular dashboard. All right. So coming towards some of the samples, for example, as we just showed you in the video as well, the Kibana dashboard gives you the capability to filter out based on the time series. For example, it could filter on dates, it could filter on days, it could even filter out on the number of hours. For example, if you want to look at the activity that has something happened in the system is not responding as per expectations, and you want to look at the activities particularly for the past hour or so, then you can go ahead, quickly select. This is from the quick select bar. If you want, you could select the time range and then apply it to look at the process activities. But as it also shows you over here, the time unit that is not fixed over. It could either be 1 hour, it could be either in minutes, it could be an hour, it could be based on days as well, depending upon the configuration. So it lets you view the processes as per that. It picks up the data based on that. All right. So next we talk about the BPMN filter. All right. This is again related to if we now try to see it from the perspective of how all of this ties together within the system. So just to create a picture, a transaction comes towards Payment Hub, and then it goes to the payment building block, any of the microservice within the payment building block, and then it is supposed to perform some action. So that information goes into, if it's an asynchronous payment form of transaction, it goes from Kafka towards ZB. ZB orchestrator is going to fire up some business process through it, and based upon that activity and those events, further actions are going to occur. Now, what happens is that since, we just saw in the index file of the Kibana as well, that it is communicating with ZBY because all the BPMN are there hosted in the ZB orchestrator we have. And those define the actual processes that we have to filter on. For example, in this process definition key that you see over here, this actually lets you select the various processes on which the filtration could be done to view specific data related to these specific activity types. And this process definition key is also possible if an index has already been made. And we saw that an index is already there, which is telling where to pick up the activities. So these are the BPMN workflows on which currently our Kibana dashboard can pull the activities from. It can show all the activities related to the bulk processor for batch transfer of through API or through bulk processor. It lets you monitor the activities of the bulk connector for closed loop transactions as well for other transactions. It also lets you monitor the activity that happened for over channel transfers, for example, for Moja loop configurations for any transactions that were routed towards the GSMA channel, and any transfer that occurred over any of these channels, either to accounts or either through the mobile money channels. It also lets you look at the activities that may have been made on bill pay for bill inquiry, or it also lets you see if any activity was made on the bill pay for payment notification, such as it happens when the bill has been paid by the payer and it comes. It also lets you see the P2G transfer request, for example, bill when the biller or an aggregator requests a payment. So these are the activities currently for which you can filter the reports and see. Moving on, we'll see that what happens when we select any of the process definitions. All right. All right. I would first take you to the process definition one and then come back to the time filter so that you could connect better with the understanding. So for example, we selected one filter, we selected a process definition, for example, actions that call and any action that we selected previously. Once we have selected that, we have applied that filter, all the information, all the processes related to it would come over here. This is, you see the transaction errors that were reported, the values that were there. It shows the dump of all the activity that happened on that specific process definition key that you had selected. This is again, for example, before you actually wrote down the name of the BPMN, that was in the process, initial process. But once you've written down that full name, for example, over here, you can see that we've selected a filter. We've selected the definition key, which says that the BPMN process ID is this payment notification that has been made on Gorilla Deadend. And then it has been selected, and any transaction, if it was there, then it would appear over here. We see one result returned for this. All right. Besides this, coming back to, because we went on to talk about the process definition and the activities we were talking about, we come back to the filters where we can view activities based on a date or a time range, for example. Over here, you see a snapshot of the activity. Let's say it was selected that for past 7 days, we want to see what activity has been occurring. So over here, you can see the data for past 7 days from the day this snapshot was taken. So it shows for January 12, January 11, and so on and so forth, if there would have been more data. Another thing which you should note over here is that as we talked about the granular type of dashboard, it is showing the data, it is broken down into different segments so that you could see the transaction that failed running and completed transactions that were successful without notifications path. So it gives you all that specific data. And once you select those data, you could have further information about that data. Similarly, on the time-based filter that we are talking about, if this is again just a sample for when the filter was applied for 1 hour, and this lists down the activity for the past 1 hour from the time this filter was selected, this last 1 hour. All right, another thing that we should mention over here is, which is important to note over here, is that the time-based filter, it is already there. So it's a quick access sort of thing. But otherwise, because you could make your own filters and your own queries as well for using Kibana. So Kibana has its own query language, which could be used to create custom filters and custom queries. And this is why we say that this is a highly customizable tool, so to speak. So if you, as long as you have that particular data and fields and it has been indexed properly in the system, you could create your own queries, generate your own reports. What we are talking about here and what is mentioned in our documentation are the basic reports. All right. Now we come to, this is a much better picture that you could see much more in detail. So we are also going to be talking about how Kibana gives us the capabilities, not just to look at, to generate some sort of reports. It also, as you saw in the video as well, if you want to try, you could go towards visualization also. And also not just lets us monitor, but it also helps us in debugging if there have been some issues. So for example, this is a sample. We are on the dashboard for debugging. In the debugging mode, we've defined the process for which we want to debug. For example, we have called up in the bulk processor, we want to look at the, for Rhino tenant, we want to have a look at the processes that happen for account lookup. So over here, these are the process instance keys. It lists down the process definitions. It counts how many instances that happen for it. It also lists down all the variables and the values against it. And then the important part which we want you to note over here is that it lists down all the tasks related to this particular process that we defined over here. And gives their not just their timestamps, it also gives the count of the tasks or activities that were performed for each of these specific tasks. Just to give you more idea, this is over here. So for example, just to make it more understandable, for example, over here we have created a very particular filter. So at one time also you could provide multiple filters, or you could use a customized query to filter out specific information. For instance, over here, this is asking for Rhino tenants bulk processor count lookup, but not the value name with batch ID. So therefore it's, and once that filter has been applied, you can look at all the activity that has occurred for this and all the task count, what is happening. And you could look at it and you would know, you could explore them further and see where the issue may have occurred. Besides this, it also lets you see at which component, which hop or which microservice at a certain time the transaction was going through. So it also gives you an idea of all the components that are in work at one time within the payments hub, how all those activities are being fired up inside payment hub. So it goes from the gateway to some flow, then goes back to the gateway, how that to and fro of the entire activity is occurring. So it helps you debug if there have been any issues as well. All right. Over to you, David. You will be talking a little bit about the warranty processes.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. So what we'll cover is what is the warranty. We'll look a bit at SLAs and how they apply. We'll take you to the customer portal, we'll show you some screenshots, and I'll take you live to the customer portal so you can see what's happening there. We'll go through the 3 request types that are relevant for Govstack: access, problem instant, and change. And then we'll look at some of the workflows of what happens. So all the components that have been delivered to Govstack are warranted for 1 year after delivery. Because it's a warranty to Govstack, obviously all the issues need to be raised by Govstack, and the method for doing that is through the customer portal, which we'll come on to in a minute. The reason for that, using that customer portal, is that it enables us to track and make sure that things are actually responded to in the right time. But in addition to warranty, sometimes you might need support, especially if you're implementing this solution. And there's 2 specific channels within Slack that are used for community support. One is the general support, and there's another one which is specific to payment hub streams. You can select either to raise a support question. Obviously, there's more people in the general support channel than there is in the payment hub support channel. But the thing to note is these are public community support channels. So be very careful you don't include private information, because the number of people viewing it is, a couple of thousand. But that does give you the strength and benefit of the community supporting and often being able to pick up and say, yes, I found that before when we did this and it got around this problem, etc. So it's worthwhile as implementers making sure you've got those Slack channels available to you as you go through it. So looking at SLAs, well, there's no specific strict SLA defined within the contract, and obviously support is obviously for an implementer would be something that they would agree maybe with the implementing party. They could come to MeFOS and get specific support if they wanted with one of the other partners within the community, or they could just rely on the general community support led chat channels we talked about earlier. However, all issues that are raised by Govstack themselves, and obviously are accepted under the warranty, are dealt with promptly, depending on whatever the severity or the impact, as we go through the tickets we'll show you, is referenced of the issues. So the first bit to take you through is the customer portal. So if you're from Govstack, it's well worth checking you have access. You should have access to the customer portal already. The reason for this is it's the only accepted method we have for taking in warranty issues. As we say, it allows trackability, it allows us to be able to respond, and it allows you to see what's happening as well. Now, what I'm going to try to do, and this may break it, is switch to my screen so I can actually show you the portal live. So bear with me.
I need you to stop sharing.
It should overtake it anyway. Okie doke. So hopefully what you can now see is the landing page you'll come into if you log into the portal. There's two main top level areas. One is login and accounts, and that enables you to request a new account for someone else to access this portal. The other is specific to applications, so whether it's a change of the application or a report a problem effectively for the application. So if you consider the application to be Govstack. As you can see, you have your own profile within this portal, and you'll also be able to see any requests that you've previously raised. So as you can see, I have 2 requests I've raised, and I could go to those and I could see the status of my requests at any time. So login and accounts, as I say, this is a fairly simple form. You'd go in, there's only one option in here, and that's to request a new account to the portal. You should automatically select your own profile if you're in here to raise it, give a summary of what it is, and then why they need an account. Now, we do have the option for an attachment in here, and I'll go through in more detail the values you need to put in that. But the reason for that is if you wanted to create a batch number of accounts into this portal, you could upload an attachment rather than having to put individual requests in for each individual person. If we look at applications next, as we say, there's 2 things you can do here. One, you can report a system problem, and the other is you can request a change. So a problem is if something isn't working properly. Now, it is essential that we gather a certain amount of information to be able to respond to a problem efficiently. So the first thing is summarize what the problem is. That should be a very short sentence. It really is to help you and to help us just, sort of filter it based on what it is, or be able to recall back what it is afterwards. The next section is to describe what happened and how it occurred. So, if you imagine you were had an issue during bulk transactions and a certain transaction type was not being accepted, you could detail what you were doing at the time, how you got to that situation, and what occurred. Details of configuration also required. So this should tell us what your Helm charts you're using, what clusters, what namespace, links to it. Worst case scenario, you can put screenshots into here as well, so that we can access them. That's essential, because depending on what configuration you have, obviously it might depend how we have to respond to it. The other key bit we require is steps to replicate. So this is so that we can reproduce the issue you've seen in our environments and therefore quickly respond to it. So what we don't want to be doing is playing constant back and forth tag of, well, can you show me this? Can you show me that? How did you get to it? Etc. So if you've got quick and easy steps to replicate the issue, that really helps us respond quickly. And then what we normally like to see is an expected and actual results. What was the expected result and what was the actual result you got? Because that enables us to very quickly filter on what could be wrong and understand the components within it. If you also select the services impacted by this enables us to direct it to the best person to actually support it with the development team. So is it relating to the API? Is it relating to G2B payment? Is it about the modular loop integration? Is it P2G, etc.? It just enables us to get it to the right place. As we say, we've got the ability to attach things such as screenshots, container logs, ingress logs, etc., things that would help us be able to do it. Also, if you have a workaround in place, it's also really useful for us to understand what that workaround is. And also what we like to understand is the urgency and the impact. This is so that we focus on the right issues first, rather than not focus on things at all. So this is really just helping us to guide into the right ones to be able to get the best response back. When you click send, you would actually get an email confirmation back to say it's accepted your system report, and then that would go into our workflow. As I say, the other option you've got is to request a change. This is where it's not necessarily a warranty issue, but something that you'd like changed in the application, or even you'd like support for maybe a particular demo or some customization, etc. Again, a very simple form that's designed to enable it just to get through quickly. So a summary title to change, so you can refer back to it later and we understand what it's about. A bit more detailed description about it. What services you think would be impacted by the change. You can select multiple services as well if you want, and you'll find that is a same list as you saw previously. What is the type of change? So is it a standard change, a normal change, an emergency change? And I'll come into a minute what the definitions of those are. Again, the urgency, is it low urgency, is it absolutely critical, this change, etc. Any attachments you might want. So if you've got mock screenshots of what you'd like something to look like, you could paste it into there. The reason for the change, i.e. is request from maybe a new implementer or a customer that wants something, or maybe another building block has designed something that now has an impact onto the payments building block. And then finally, some indication of what stage you're at for funding for a change. Is there funding available? Is there not funding available? Do your approvers need to do it once you understand what the costs are, etc., just so we understand how to handle that change. So that is the portal. If I stop sharing, Rabia, can you reshare the deck where we got to?
Yeah, just sharing it. Is my screen visible?
It is, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Just let all the boxes disappear.
Yeah. Okay.
Excellent, thank you. So what I'll do is I'll quickly go through some of the next slides. They pretty much explain exactly what I showed you in real life. I just thought it was easier to show you in real life. So this is showing the initial landing page. The next slide shows you the page you get for new access requests. The next page shows you how to fill in an access request. So if we go on to the next slide. So this is what I was talking about, the information requiring access request. So the summary should be quite brief, i.e., John Smith customer or Michaela paid support. So we've got something to refer back to. Describe what's needed for the account, the role definition, and the email address, which is very important for the person that needs the account because that's how we would set them up. And as I say, if you want to do bulk, you can attach it. So there, what we'd need is first name, their family name, their email address, and role required. So basically, the information would have done for one. Click send, and you'll get an email acknowledgement back of your support request. They automatically alert our team as well, so we can get those set up very quickly. So as I said, this is the screen for application issues, where application is Govstack, in this case for BHEE. So the first one is for raising problems for warranty assessment, and the second option would be for change requests. If you go on to the next slide. So this is the warranty problem form I just showed, so we can quickly go through those. Next one. Okay. So as I said, what do we need? We need the quick summary, a succinct title for the problem, and you'll find that's a mandatory field within this. A description of what happened and why it occurred, so a narrative description of the issue. How it came to be this way, you know, was it always this way, etc. Again, that's a mandatory field. The configuration, so this detail the configuration in which the issue has been observed, you know, the Helm chart's used, it's version 1.13.0, for example, the clusters, the namespace, links, etc. Steps to be able to reproduce that issue as you've observed it. The expected results that you expected to have, the actual results. The services impacted, and as you can see, there's a standard list that we use for both of these. Then the evidence, so these would typically be log files from your implementation system, any health check reports, any error messages. You could use screenshots if needs be, but it's really preferable to give us the logs. That helps us get there really quickly. Detail any workaround you've got. How critical does it need to be fixed? So, you know, really critical is, you know, sort of it's stopping everything type issues. High is it's, you know, stopping some things. Medium is it's kind of nice to have, and low is, you know, if you can fix it, it'd be really great type issues. And the impact. So again, is it extensive and widespread? Is it significant and large? Is it moderate or limited? Or is it minor and localized? And that just enables us to prioritize if we've got multiple issues in at the same time to the right ones. When you click send again on this one, it will give you an email acknowledgement. Similarly, on the change request form, which we've shown on the things, we can go through those two slides quickly. Title of the change, description of the change, the service impacted from the same list. So change types, as I mentioned earlier, we have a few change types. Standard would be a routine action, so a backup type action. Normal is probably what your normal choice is, and that's just for new requirements, etc. So it's just understanding what type of change it is. And again, urgency enables us. So critical should be where the change is required to restore service. So most of those probably would come under a warranty issue anyway, but it could be maybe another building block has changed its API, and therefore the service no longer works end to end. So it might be critical to you doing it, but it's not a warranty issue. So we do leave the field available to you. High should be for close time bound responses, and maybe you need support for a demo in a certain time period. So it's time bound, so it's high urgency. Medium should be for changes that can be accommodated in sort of the next dot release. And then low should be for changes which, you know, you just need next time we do a major release, you don't need a bug fix for. Again, the change reason should detail why. So is it repair, is it upgrade, is it maintenance, is it new functionality or other? Mainly that helps us direct it to the right team to get a really quick response back to you. And as we said, the funding stuff, that just enables us to know if there's anyone else we need to interact with and understand, you know, sort of your expectations and our expectations. Again, clicking send will give you an email acknowledgement. And as I showed earlier on the screen, you can always go back and see any change requests, any support requests, any access requests you've put in and their status. Okie doke. So what is an incident problem? Well, an incident obviously is an event where the outcome was not as expected. Now, in terms of the application, this should always be referenced back to Annex 4 when you're thinking about warranty. So was it something that was within the Annex 4 and it was a functionality that we were meant to be delivering? If so, then obviously that gives you what the expected outcome is, and you can speedily raise the issue. We see that there's a number of different actors that might be involved in this. Obviously, the incident observer is the person that actually witnessed the event within Govstack. The incident coordinator might be somebody else who is coordinating with us to get the response, again, within Govstack. Within MeFOS, the first person that actually looks at the incident is the product owner. That's to make sure we do a very quick triage. Is it warranty? Is it not warranty? So that we can have a discussion if needs be. We'd have a development owner that would look at what's gone wrong, investigate it, and propose the fix. And we also have a design owner. So if it's a fundamental design issue that needs to be looked at, then obviously we'd go to the design owner to look at that and how we would address the issue. So these are the workflows. So your ticket, when it comes in through the system, will navigate for these workflows. So obviously it comes in at the top and it's always in an open state. It can move into pending if we're having a discussion. Say, for example, we're discussing whether it is actually a warranty issue or not. That would move into the pending state. As soon as work is in progress, it would move to the work in progress state. So obviously you could go pending to work in progress, or it could go direct to work in progress. Once that's completed, you will move to completed state. That's where we supply you the fix to the issue or the instructions to fix the issue. And once that's been verified, it will then move to the closed state. We obviously have a cancelled state over the right-hand side as well, if we need to cancel it at any point in time via agreement. So that's the statuses that effectively the incident problem would move through. For change requests, a change request basically is anything that was outside what we were contracted to do originally. You can tell the lawyers wrote that line for you. And typical types of changes we expect to see, but it's not limited, would be maybe support for demos, an incremental feature, a change of an existing feature away from the way it was designed, or installation support. If you're putting a new environment in, you might want support for a new environment. Again, just using that system really helps us to do it speedily, and it also means it's resilient against any changes in staff. So, I know it's tempting to use email or Slack or whatever else to send change requests and get response, but we do have staff turnover in the team sometimes, and so using the system just enables us to make sure it always gets to somebody, including holiday times, to be addressed. So again, if we go on to the actors you'd see in a change, the change observer, the person has the requirement effectively within Govstack. There may be a coordinator, it could be procurement or anybody else within Govstack, depending. The product owner, again, who will do the initial triage and then make sure the right team assesses it, or multiple teams, if there's multiple teams to assess the change. Development owners and design owners who again might be brought in to provide support to that change or deliver the change later on. So the change workflow is a bit more complicated. So obviously it comes in, it initially goes into review, which is the triage. Obviously there's option for that to be declined, but that's probably unlikely, but we obviously cater for that, and equally there's an option for it to be cancelled at any point, you can see down that left hand side. But basically you'll go through a planning. That's an iterative process with authorization, because we want to discuss it with you, get the right cost, scope, etc. Once it's been authorized, then it would go into awaiting implementation. So that depends on the timescales for resource availability potentially, based against those urgencies you'd have. Implementing would be when we actually implement it. And again, it would move to completed once we've actually delivered it and it's been tested. We also have the failed option box, just in case what we implemented failed. But obviously then that would be non-chargeable effectively if it went through that route. So next I want to briefly move on to updates and patching. So what is the procedure for applying updates and patches? Well, Payment Hub EE is continually being developed, and new releases will be released beyond 1.13.0, which is the Govstack tested baseline effectively. And we do recommend and encourage that implementers and adopters do keep up to date with the latest version. Now, the reason for that is obviously support is easier if you're on the latest version. It also will give you many more new features as new versions, new connectors are built in. Obviously, the latest details of any releases will be maintained in the Mythos Git book. So we do have the baseline copy of the Git book for installation instructions and how to do it, which is now stored in the Govstack Confluence repository, and it's linked at the end of this deck when we get to it. But for latest releases, that will always be maintained in our Git book so that anybody can actually go and implement it. Updates will always be done by Helm so that you can actually choose components you want to update, or you can update the whole system. And we have 3 levels of releases effectively, and this goes into all our release candidate versions. So you have major releases, you have minor releases, which are new features, and you have patches. So the one indicates the architecture. So we're still on our first architecture for PHEA. So that's the major release component. We're on version 13 of our minor releases. That's features. And 0 indicates that there's no patches at this present point in time. But if there was a patch that came along or a hotfix for something, you'd find it moved to maybe 1.13.1. So 1.14.0 would be the next new feature along, etc. It's important though, when you consider doing updates, you have a proper pipeline to do this, especially if you're in production rather than demo or test environments. So we would recommend a 3-stage approach of development, staging, production. This is industry best practice in general. So development may not exist within your environments. You may not have a development environment if you're not doing development, but obviously some implementers do take the base stuff and then develop on top of it, in which case they would typically have their own development environment. The next environment we recommend is a staging environment. So this staging environment should be where you put the release with a custom setup. So this could be custom reporting, it could be custom dashboards, etc. And you test it in that environment and make sure that it doesn't impact anything in your critical workflows. So the staging environment would always be, if you've got a production environment, we'd always recommend a staging environment first to make sure you don't impact customers when you put a new release out there. And then obviously the final environment, once you're happy in your staging environment, it's not going to impact customers, is to move it across to production, which is it should be the only environment with live customers that you actually have. Backup and disaster recovery considerations. We all hope that backups and that aren't needed and disasters don't occur, etc. None of us want that situation, but equally none of us want a situation where our data has been lost and end users are impacted. And sadly, we do see that occur sometimes. They normally hit the headlines when people do, when they've not thought of a reliable plan. And the time to really think about that plan for how you're going to do backup, disaster recovery and resilience is at the point of implementation. Once you've implemented, it is too late because you've already got live customer data and you'd have to go through and re-protect it. I think the other thing, cloud approach does not protect you from any impacts of disasters, backups and resilience. There's features within clouds that can help you, but a cloud is still a physical server somewhere where your thing is. So the sort of issues that can occur, natural disasters wherever the cloud data center is concerned, earthquakes, flooding, etc. Cyber events could take down a data center. They could actually impact your installation as well. So you need to think about what approaches would you have in the case of a cyber event to restore your data from backup or move to a secondary platform. And obviously political disturbances can cause issues as well, either in terms of the direct environment, or maybe even the context of in some countries it can mean that connections are severed, and might mean you might not be able to get to where your data center is hosted. Definitely adopting one of the high availability modules we showed you in session 3 will help, not only in reducing downtime, but it will also increase throughput and resilience. It will also help you with the upgrades we've just discussed as well, because if you have a single instance, then obviously there will be a downtime when you do the upgrade. If you have a multi-region or a multi-stage system, you could upgrade one half and then flip over to the other half and back. So you could, depending on the criticality of your system, you may not need to even cater for downtime for that. It's important to consider what disasters you want to cater for. It's great to go to the highest scale, multi-region, but do you really want to consider geographical disturbances, or are you, just interested in systems failure resilience? And I think the other key thing that impacts into what model you use there is also to consider the regulatory impacts. So if you go to multi-region, for example, the data will be transiting between those two regions, and you might find regulation stops you having data in some regions. So you might have to consider, multiple data centers within the same region to get that same level of resilience. Whichever option you use, backup is still needed. So even if you've got resilience, you still need to back up your databases and your configurations, and that should be a base requirement of any implementation. On-premises backups are fine, but they really are only complementary to a remote backup approach, because on-premises backups are highly vulnerable and should only be used, for expediency or a secondary backup approach. So moving on to some insights and learnings we've had from other deployments of PHE, etc. So first of all, monitoring uptime. So uptime obviously needs to be monitored for compliance to SLAs. Now, even though there's no Govstack SLA around uptime of the system, because that's down to how you implement it, most implementers will actually have a requirement to monitor and will have an SLA to whoever they're providing the service to do it. So infrastructure provisioning tools should be considered, along with API health checks to make sure systems are there. We don't have any instances where there's open source software we used at all in the Ethos community yet for uptime infrastructure. The one that's most commonly used and is recommended within the community is actually New Relic, and is worth looking at for that dashboard and the uptime reporting of services. But other options exist. It's not specific to the Govstack or the PHE code, which software you use there. And if you've got an existing set of platforms, you might have your own monitoring tools, which you can then apply back to PHE. Equally, service health checks can be done through back-end software, Prometheus, and then you could use something like Grafana as the dashboard to see it. It's a bit more heavyweight, Grafana, so it does require a bit more effort to do it. And all those methods really relate to how you observe and how you want to observe monitoring. If we look at alerting, again, we use New Relic, as we say. Equally, Elasticsearch has alerting mechanisms within it, and those can work with Slack and they can work with email. I think they can even work with text, if I remember correctly. So you can get lots of different notifications if you need to. You also want to probably monitor the uptime of the ZB orchestrator, and that's done through that Prometheus matrix. And obviously, you've got the ability, because of the fact all of the issues would be an event, which is into Kibana and Elasticsearch, as we looked at earlier, to have that real-time monitoring capability through Kibana and Elasticsearch. And then you could use that for debugging, as some of the examples Rabia showed, where you can go down granularly to try and work out what the issue is. Again, you typically want to monitor your databases independently of the application as well. Again, things like New Relic could actually do that, but there's many other that do it. The one thing you need to be careful of when you're looking at monitoring databases is, again, where that monitoring solution is actually hosted. So, for example, New Relic is hosted on servers in the US, so you might have a regulatory impact over the monitoring of the databases in the US depending on your implementation region. So they're all things you need to take into consideration. Then if we move on to look at operational considerations, well, typically the main thing you need to look at is that handover. So how do you hand over between the development and implementing team across to the in-life team? Very much it's about access. And again, you can use things such as managed databases and bits like that and snapshot policies to really reduce the load between those that implemented and those that aren't operationally running it and having to do it. Equally, you could use postman collections and things like that, which will enable you to have, hot, warm, and cold data feeds to minimise the need for manual intervention. And then there's database and archiving tools, which are typically not part of the cloud base, but some people in the community are already using AWS, RDS, and other cloud databases, which enables for data backups and archiving. So they're operational type considerations that you should look at. I think that's enough of my voice, so I'll pass back to Rabia to give a bit of a summary and recap of where we've been on the course.
Okay. Sorry, I just switch back to this. Actually, my mouse was winding up a bit. I'm sorry.
Up a bit, section 8.
Yeah. All right. So
you need to get rid of the top bar, Rabia, I'm afraid.
Oh yeah, I'm so sorry. We have to wait for this to go. All right, we come to the end of the session. We are going to come to have this summary is going to be a little bit longer than the other sessions because we'll be talking about what we've learned in this session. Then we're going to do a very quick recap of the entire course of all the 5 sessions that we've had. And finally, we're going to round it up with sort of a visual representation of a click-through of how a transaction passes through the ecosystem, just to give an idea of the process. So during this session, we talked quickly about Kibana and how it is used as the visual tool to see what processes are happening within the payment hub, and why is it used, how it is it important for the payment hub. We also talked about how Kibana is already configured in our default files, but it could be further customized as per the requirements of the implementers. Then we went through the overview of the processes that are there for warranty as well as for requesting changes. And we had David walked us through the portal that is there for the users where the profiles could be created and the requests for change or any issues could be logged based upon their, and with all the information that is required, as well as their criticality and urgency. Then we also had a quick walkthrough of how to ensure that the system is resilient, how to maintain it, manage it. We talked about the SLAs and just rounded up all, we included this with to talk about the post-deployment operational things that have to be considered. This session was about this. This also concludes our training roadmap. We have been through all 5 sessions so far. And of course, if there are any questions and anything, we would be happy to come back to them as and when they are received. Just to have a quick course recap so far, we started out with session 1, which was a general, or let's say a bird's eye view of the entire project that this is, what position does this particular project have in the larger picture, so to speak. What are digital public goods, how they are important for the implementation of DPIs, and how these payment building block specifications implemented over Payment Hub fit into that larger picture. Then we also talked about the basic use cases that are being considered for the payment building block implementation, and how they travel through the system in a larger way at a high level. Then moving on towards session 2, we went into a little bit more detail about the architecture of the payment hub itself. So during session 2, we talked about the approach that has been taken in designing the payment building block over Payment Hub, the components and microservices that already existed in the Payment Hub, and how they complemented and supported in the implementation of payment building block requirements or APIs, and how they're able to connect with all the other building blocks. Also, the architecture outlined the underlying requirements from the payment building block working group, as well as general requirements of interoperability, how it could be scaled, how it has a modular approach, as well as the presence of various connectors, which could be developed by users of the community and could be used by anyone who is deploying that to be able to communicate with external entities as well. During session 2, something which we also emphasized on was that since Payment Hub is implemented over Kubernetes, therefore it makes it also infrastructure agnostic. So therefore it is it helps in this also, that for various jurisdictions there is no limitation as to what infrastructure has to be there, apart from the tools that are required over there. And we also talked about, briefly touched upon the subject, that how Payment Hub can be implemented using the Circle CI files, how that whole entire pipeline is maintained over there, and that the test cases are maintained, the test plans are maintained in Cucumber, which are also written within the CI/CD pipeline that we have. And all the basic logic, all the basic information configuration of each and every microservice of the Payment Hub, they are contained within the Helm charts, and those Helm charts are also loaded into the Circle CI pipeline. During the third session, we tried to give you an overview of the possible steps that you have taken. We also guided you towards the relevant documentation and commands that need to be used to actually deploy Payment Hub as per the requirements, either on clouds or on premises. During session 3, as a sample to match the requirements of Govstack as well, the samples used mostly refer to the AWS cloud. However, it could be configured, and it depends upon the implementer's choice, which cloud they want to use, or whether they want to do it on premises. It depends upon the implementers. During session 3, we talked about the possible models of deployment that could be used by implementers, and also when to use a particular model. For example, the barebone model, we suggested to use just if you are just getting into this and you want to test it out, or you want to see if particular feature works or not. Then we had the minimal model, which, by the way, is also the default model that is written down in the charts and charts that are there in our files that we give. This minimal model has, again, it's in a single cluster, however, single node, but there are multiple engines, real-time engines, and it gives better availability and better fault tolerance as compared to the single node, which does not have any backup at all. And then there was this third model, which is full-scale model, which is good for, let's say, cross-border implementation across regions, because it gives you very high availability, lots of lots of fault tolerance. It has multiple engines working in multiple instances. However, irrespective of the model, the basic functionality related to the modules that we're giving, the connectors that are there, even the ELK stack we talked about today, these all are deployed. These all components are deployed any of those models. So therefore, you have the basic functionality of Payment Hub, including the payment building block overlay that has been built up on it in each of these models. So they are good for that. Finally, in session 3, we also tried to give you an overview of the basic configurations that you could do. We basically routed you towards the again, the particular documentation and ways in which those some basic components could be configured in the system. And we talked about why those particular parameters are very important for configuration, because they are actually the parameters that would make the system functional. Because of these configurations, you would be able to let the system know of your tenants, let the system know of the various processes, BPMN, and how which event would trigger which event and how to go about it. So it would make the system operational, functional, so to speak. In session 3, just as a last mention, before we move on to session 4, session 3, we also emphasize the point that even though the deployment is fairly simple in terms of the steps that have to be followed, but it is highly recommended. In fact, it is required that the personnel, the users who are actually deploying that, have some prior knowledge. So we talked about those prerequisites apart from the infrastructure and the components or systems that are required, which were already there written in the slide deck that we shared. But there are also information regarding skill set required for Kubernetes deployment, for handling CI/CD pipelines and Circle CI, having understanding of the Helm chart and the commands that it uses, because those commands are shell based. There are different very technical commands, and they could be changed or configured depending upon the requirements. So various directories may have to be set up, namespaces may have to be set up. So a person who has some prior knowledge of DevOps or has a knowledge of all these components should be the one who would actually deploy these the instance of Payment Hub. Also, it also required that you some systems were set up. For example, cloud account was there, and you were also allowed to use that account to fire up transactions, needed an account in Circle CI as well. So all those requirements had been shared in the 3rd session, and we've also routed towards pertinent documentation to refer them from. Then we came to session 4, which was basically about how to test the system once it has been deployed. In session 4, we talked about how the system was tested during implementation. We talked about the basic scenarios that have been implemented or catered for when we implemented payment building block for G2P and P2G use cases. And we then talked about how, if the system is, let's say, has been deployed, how an environment, how an ecosystem could be simulated using the existing accounts so that a test round of transactions could be fired up. We shared in detail, we talked in detail about the scenarios for P2G and G2P use cases, and what inputs are required for those scenarios to be triggered. And if everything goes fine, what are the outputs that are expected from them? Also, the outputs that are sent by them in case of rejection of transactions. So also we talked about the direction in which the transactions flow when a certain scenario is triggered. We also talked about the prerequisites before the testing could be started. Meanwhile, we also talked about, we picked up a few scenarios. For example, one scenario each from each of the use cases. We picked up, for example, bulk payments. We talked about how that could be tested in a demo sort of situation. And once that situation is met, once that test has been carried out, which APIs from the payment building block stack have been tested. and how that validates what we've been saying about the implementation. We also had a brief view. We went through a small video on the testing activity that occurred for P2G payments, because that is for P2G, only the APIs have been implemented. And we showed how the positive and negative cases were tested out for it, which APIs that have been implemented were used and which ones were mocked out, and how that testing occurred. So we shared a brief snippet of that testing as well. And finally, we concluded the session 4 with the possible test cases that could be written into the test plan if the implementers want to test on their own. They matched with the testing that was done at our end when we were implementing payment building block, but just to give an idea of what could be written in the test plans. And finally, today's session, this was about how we could monitor in terms of the processes that are happening within the payment hub. So we talked about Kibana and why Kibana is specifically being used, because it is the standard combination of Logstash, Elasticsearch, and Kibana. And we talked about how the entire system comes to one picture when we talked about Kibana, because how it is all related. We looked at a Circle CI file and saw that how basic configurations are done, where it is pulling up the activities from, how it could be filtered, and also that there are multiple options for filtering. We also pointed this out, that not just the basic filters that are there, Kibana could be used with its own query language, and multiple filters could be made up, and reports could be seen in terms of implementers or your requirement. Then we saw some samples of reports that could be generated. Also, how Kibana is not just for one purpose, it could also help us in debugging the process as well, which also actually highlighted that when we are calling up the process, a certain process, we put in certain filters, and it returns us the activity of that entire process is involved in it. It also shows the various hops or components that were called during that transactions was occurring, or those processes were being carried out, and how multi-threaded or multiple actions or activities are occurring for one process at one time. Then we moved on towards the warranty process and how that warranty could be, and if there's some issues during the warranty period occur, how the participants could go to the portal, how log their queries over there, chalk out their criticality and the urgency for resolving that issue, or maybe they would have some request related to requesting for a demo, or just to point out something that a proper portal is available over there, and all the users should have access to it. If not, they could request access and set it up. It not only does it make clarify the issue to the implementers at the other end, to the main people, but it also ensures that the issue is looked into properly, and rather than being lost in the influx of emails that may have been done. Also, we talked about that there is not just this portal, but there are also Slack channels there available for the community in which they can raise their concerns, which are often, we have a general channel, which is of course where there are many more participants in that channel as compared to specific payments hub channel. There are comparatively less participants, but since both of them are public, it is again advised that information that may be private or may not have to be shared, it should not be shared over that. Then we also talked about the SLAs briefly. We also talked about how to ensure that the system stays resilient and its health is maintained, and how to check it. And then we came to the end of this session. So before we close the entire course, we just wanted to give you, we wanted to, in fact, in a nutshell, close this session, what this is all about. So let's say this is the ecosystem of Payment Hub, or the real world simulation. So we have over here, what you see in this blue zone is the Govstack infrastructure, which is all related to the building blocks that are there. Then there is a pair infrastructure. So essentially, as we talked we've been saying from start as well, payment building block is actually assisting in supporting in letting the payments happen rather than making the payments itself. So there is a pair infrastructure which is external to the payment hub, payment building block type. So this is the pair infrastructure that is there, which consists of all the DFSPs that are there. Then we also have an external switch. There could be multiple external switch, but just to show you that for a simple transaction to occur, these are the type of hops for an end-to-end transaction to occur, and these are the type of zones that a transaction goes through. And finally, there's an payee infrastructure. The reason we are showing you this is because we want to show you which zone a transaction travels through if it is going to be happening. So I'll just give you a click through of this. We have the narration over here. So the government, let's say any government has implemented a Govstack approach for making payments from its programs to beneficiaries. So as we talked in yesterday's session as well, the government may have, and this is specifically, we're talking in context of G2P right now because it's the larger use case. And they have set up a Govstack approach. Govstack approach is related to these various building blocks who each of them are performing their own specific functions. All right, and this has been highlighted over here. This is the Govstack infrastructure. So the government may have implemented, if they've implemented, because this also ties up with the concept of the DPI for digital public infrastructure. They would have an ID building block, for example, MOSIP. They may have implemented a registration building block, for example, e-registrations, which would be responsible for registering or enrolling beneficiaries into certain programs. And if you recall from our yesterday's session about setting up a demo, this is where we would say that participants have come and gave their information and been given registration. The government would have implemented information mediator. Now, these are acting as the gateways. They ensure which information is traveling between each of the building blocks. For example, we have X-Road from. And finally, they have implemented payments building block. For example, the MeFOS Payment Hub Enterprise Edition. As we said previously, also this building block is you could say the gatekeeper of all the information that is traveling between all the building blocks. All right. So as we've just said over here, it's very important before the transaction could actually occur or the demo could actually occur. It's important that all of these know each other. So they should be configured within each other. And this also relates back to our point where we talked about configuring specific tenants and other entities within the payment building block. And same is the case for other building blocks as well. Each of them must know each other. And we are also assuming that a program has been set up for the government, for example, to make maternity payments. And this is, let's say, we talked about in our yesterday's session of Gov001 being the program ID, so to speak, for a government payment. And of course, once a program has been set up and the payments have to be made from certain payer bank, let's say this is this central bank in this instance. So individuals would come to the registration building block, and they would be onboarded. Now this activity depends upon the registration building block, how that is done, whether through some UI, through manual process, that depends upon. And if you recall, we've talked about the beneficiary onboarding process. This is communicated. Again, the information flows through IMBB and through the environmental ingress egress controllers, and then goes to the payment building block. However, before it goes to the payment building block, what we did not talk about in our previous demonstrations is, because we wanted to keep it targeted towards payment building block, there may be an identity building block as well. Now, this identity building block, what it would do when registration building block is sending the information, this would verify that whether the person whose information is being sent is correct or not. And this implementation could also be seen from the Govstack sandbox in the simulations, where we've implemented the unconditional social cash transfer. It shows the hop between registration building block, then the IDBB, and how they're verified. And via the IMBB, they go ahead to register the beneficiary. So the core information over here is the functional ID. Each beneficiary is allotted a functional ID. And this is so as to map the identity of the beneficiary themselves. Functional ID is the only piece of information that is shared between the Govstack to identify to extract their further information. This relates to setting the payment modality. So while they're being registered, they're asked whether they want to receive payments in a bank account or a Momo account or through vouchers, or they want to use an alias for another payment. Now this, we have come to the beneficiary onboarding process. Via IMBB, that information is transferred to the payment hub. It reaches the payment building block. Now over here, we have made just an overview of the payment building block, payment hub. It has all of these components. We've not gone into much detail. This information is stored in the IDT account map, as you can see over here. And if required, through the beneficiary update API, those information could be updated. We talked about the scenarios as well for testing as well. Let's set a later date. Now we are entering the time where we are talking about the scenario of bulk payments, for example. So let's say payments have to be made together to 4, 5, 6 beneficiaries at one time. Now, registration building block will prepare the batch file against the functional IDs for which the payments have to be made with the amount. Then this is passed via the IMBB to the payments building block, which is payments hub. It fetches the financial information from the ID account mapper. Of course, bulk processing engine is involved, which we've not seen. We are just having the bigger picture. As we talked about it, once it receives the financial addresses, it breaks them down into sub batches, which are targeted towards specific payee DFSPs. And we have all that other process which we are just clouding over here, is in which the sub batches are made, and these instructions are sent to the payer bank as well to verify whether payment could be made or not, to get pre-authorization and all that. So that has been done here, assuming that has been received. Now these instructions again go via some sort of connector to maybe the payment hub, this instance over here shows the connector through this to ask the payer central bank or the payer FSP to disburse those payments to the end beneficiaries. Now this over here, you see, via any immediate infrastructure, as we mentioned over here, it depends upon whatever infrastructure is present. If let's say, in our instance, we are showing Mojo Loop because we have connectors for that. But if a jurisdiction or a country has their own switch, it would be integrated with this and it would happen via that. So one thing to note over here is this whole part is external to the payment building block implementation. So, but since the rails are the same and the connectors are present, it could happen through any of the system, and it could reach the end users either on their accounts or on their mobile phones or whichever way they possibly do. So this is just a visual representation of what we've been talking about. We have given the sources for referencing for all the information that is there, that these are the main spaces from where you could get the documentation and the links for going through and for this study. And then we come to questions. That's it. Questions, anyone, if there are?